Welcome back to the show for business owners, your first 1,000 clients. I'm your host, Mitch Russo, and I've been an entrepreneur, business owner, corporate CEO, venture capitalist, and company founder for the last 30 years. And if you are just joining us for the first time, the mission of my show is twofold: to uncover your potential and guide you to realizing it, and provide you with the tools and the wisdom to get your own company to 1,000 clients and beyond. My guests are leaders and business owners who have been selected to share their hard-won wisdom, who want you to avoid the potholes of life and cruise smoothly to your own success. Check out past episodes to see exactly what I'm talking about. Well, today's guest is Perry Marshall, who started his professional life like I did as an electrical engineer, found a job, and was promptly laid off just as his wife was 3 months pregnant. No job, no money, and no real prospects for work as an engineer. He became none other than a marketing consultant. But the real turning point for Perry was his discovery of the 80-20 principle, which led to several life-changing transitions and to eventually write the ultimate guide to Google AdWords in 2007, which became the world's most popular book on internet advertising. And it all started with 80-20. Since then, he's built a series of courses for his clients to elevate their skills, their revenue, and their lives. And I am one of his clients. Perry Marshall, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mitch. That was a great introduction. And, maybe you told me, but I hadn't quite locked in that you were a double E too. So yes, electrical engineers rule a very tiny little slice of the world, and we do it proudly.
Yes, exactly. And it's so funny how many of us in the electrical engineering community have ended up in two different fields. One is music, and the other is marketing. Isn't that funny?
It is. In music and marketing, I know a lot of really brilliant marketers who love jazz, and I think they're both the same thing. I think marketing and jazz improvisation are pretty much the same skill set. You have a simple set of rules. There's a time signature. There's a key. Go.
You got it.
And what can you do, and how fast can you do it? And can you do it in concert with other people? It's the art.
Yep. And the thing about engineering, I mean, the stuff I learned in school is long obsolete. But what I left with was a way of thinking that has served me all of my life. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah. In fact, I think that for me, it was really like a liberal arts education for the 21st century. And furthermore, very little of what I learned is obsolete. And maybe it was because my school took kind of a theoretical approach to it, but I find the engineering skills to be immensely valuable in online marketing. In fact, it's really even core to 80-20. We can get to that later. But, marketing is arithmetic and human psychology, and if you could call it human engineering. And it really is serious on the engineering side, and of course it's really serious on the human side. And so it's blending those two things together. And what I hope that I do is, for all of my customers, regardless of their background, is I do install a little bit of engineer into their business brain, because sometimes those skills are priceless.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what attracted me to your stuff. I like the procedural aspect of it, but I like the thinking behind it as well. And as far as my education, I haven't yet found too many vacuum tubes in my marketing funnel, but I'm still looking.
Vacuum tubes are alive and well. That's the funny thing, though.
I know. Yeah.
Very much alive and well, and analog is roaring back. So, in fact, if there's a lot of people that have never had a real analog music experience, and you should go try to have one, because it's a pretty special thing. I still build stereo equipment, and every few months I do a project. And about a month ago, I had a bunch of people. They were at my son's graduation, including some of my friends, and And this one lady goes, "Hey, Perry, I saw a picture of your speakers on Facebook. Can we go hear your speakers?" And so I take everybody up into my man cave, and I start playing music for them. And most of them had never had that experience before. They were like, "Oh my word, that was amazing." They'd never experienced that before. In fact, another girl said, "Wow, that was as amazing as a sunset at the Grand Canyon." Wow. She just kind of squealed when the song was over.
Wow, that's fantastic. And by the way, as the owner of a restored pair of Macintosh MC60s fed by a vacuum tube preamp and a Roxanne turntable, I think I can relate.
Well, we'll have to get together one of these times, either when you're in Chicago or when I'm in Boston. So, wow.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so true. So, Perry, I think at this point, I would love to dive a little bit deeper into your background. And I mean, the story of how you lost your job and what happened next, all that is, stuff that you can never plan. You never really start out thinking, oh, well, I guess I'll just lose my job and become something else and know what that is. Tell me a little bit about how that evolved for you. And more importantly, tell me the thinking behind the decisions that you made at that time.
Well, I got invited into this meeting. I was designing speakers at Jensen. This is what I was doing at the time. I designed the speakers in the 96 Honda Civic, for example. and there's this meeting, and there's all these strange people in it. Like, why are all these people from all these weird departments in here today? And the guy's pacing back and forth and looking a little nervous. I'm like, this doesn't seem good. And we all get laid off. And I remember, the last stop out the door, I sit down in this office. Somebody gives me a severance check. And I think most of these people were bitter. And I said, hey, it's not like the day I was born that some other guy was born with the responsibility of giving me a job. So thank you. It was great for the last 2.5 years, and, sayonara. And out I left. And I remember driving home like, well, I guess what am I going to do now? And I could have stayed in the field I was in, but I would have had to move, and I didn't want to move out of Chicago. And so I ended up going into sales, which was 2 years of bologna sandwiches and ramen soup. And, 6 months later, my wife was going to come home from work, and she did. So our income was suddenly cut in half. And so, the next couple of years were tough sledding. And, it was as first sales jobs go, it wasn't too bad. And the people at the company were really nice. But in other ways, it seemed like it was a fit, but it really wasn't. There was this just constant square peg round hole thing going on. As I tell the specific story, I want to be really clear about what is the general principle behind what I'm saying. And the problem with that job is it was too much sales and not enough engineering. It didn't really harness my true skills. And I found some jobs, some products that we sold that did use my skills, but in this particular situation, they were very hard to sell. And I kept kind of fighting my nature because my employers wanted a sales guy who's just going to go slapbacks, tell jokes, get purchase orders, and quote unquote build relationships, which, they never really seemed to be real relationships. They were really just buyer seller relationships. And I really needed to be in something where a regular sales guy could not do the job without some technical skill. And it really needed to blend the two things together. Well, I eventually got fired from that job. It took 2 years, but finally we gave up trying everything we could do, and I took a different job that was just a better fit. Not only from the engineering side, where I was really I was really talking to engineers about stuff that a regular sales guy wouldn't be able to competently talk to them about. But then I also kind of flipped it around where I was also engineering the marketing. And what had happened about 6 months before I got fired from the previous job was I had wandered into a big coliseum with all these speakers like Zig Ziglar and Barbara Bush, and the last speaker of the day was Dan Kennedy. And I had never been exposed to any of that before. And Dan is talking about direct response marketing. He's talking about how cold calling is the worst form of grunt work, which Dan was being more brutally honest than any other sales trainer I'd ever seen on a stage, because they all tried to sugarcoat it and make it, just smile and pick up that phone, right? Exactly. And so he levitated $300 out of my wallet, which was a small miracle considering how threadbare my wallet was at the time. And I latched on direct response marketing. Well, this is actually in the middle of 1997. Okay. And 6 months later, when I got fired from this job, I take this other job, and this new company has a website, and the customers are actually using it. Because they're engineers, actually. They're early adopters. They have computers on their desks. They're using the web. And so nobody was really talking about this yet, but it only took me a few weeks to figure out, hey, wait a minute. All of the stuff I'm reading about direct mail and catalogs and responses and sales letters all pretty much applies directly to the web. Like, I can read a Dan Kennedy newsletter, which at the time was all about direct mail and, print advertisements and stuff like that, maybe press releases. And I could just apply this to the web, and I need a response mechanism, and I need to measure it and all this stuff. And we're off to the races. And I was doing a very early primitive form of information marketing to sell computer hardware and software to industrial companies. And I liked that job. And actually my first commission check, is the best month I'd ever had in my career. It started to work almost immediately. And I really was starting to see how vividly now how much I had been fighting my own nature and cramming a square peg into the round hole. In fact, there was one time with that first sales job where we went to visit, we were manufacturers reps, and we went to visit one of our principals, the companies we represented. And I reached out my hand and I introduced myself. Hi, I'm Perry. I'm an electrical engineer. And my boss says, Perry is a sales guy. He's not, and sometimes he just gets a little confused about what he does. It was like jerking me back by the scruff of the neck. Well, thank you very much, Wally. I will remember not to do that again. Yeah. But you get the idea, Mitch, right? When somebody doesn't, when you have a really great strength and somebody doesn't value it, you're probably in the wrong place. And really, the very first week on that job, I had that sense, and I just suppressed it.
Well, I got to tell you, Perry, what's funny about the story? You have no idea what a parallel life we've led, because I graduated college and I went into an engineering position. And to me, the job was great. I loved engineering, but I was invited to become a field applications engineer and support the sales force for a semiconductor company. And I said, yes, I would. So I'm going out there, and just like you, I would introduce myself as, hi, I'm Mitch. I'm a Mostex field applications engineer. And the sales guy would pull me back, stick me in the corner and saying, yeah, and we're here and we represent Mostec. And off he would go. So I would be thrown into a conference room, run the PowerPoint slides, and then off I would have to sit while these guys, as you say, backslapping their way through a 3-martini lunch while I sat there just miserable. I hated my life, Perry, during this period.
Wow.
Until finally I got up enough nerve to go to the head of the entire department, and I said, look, I can sell better than those guys because I'm an engineer and I actually know what these damn products do.
Mitch, when I worked at Jensen, about once a month or once every 2 weeks, some vendor would come in and do a lunch and learn, and they would buy everybody pizza, and they would do their dog and pony show. And the engineers would show up for the pizza, okay? And not necessarily because they were interested. And there was always a question that everybody would ask before the people showed up. They would say, so is this going to be a sales and marketing guy or is it going to be an engineer? Because what that meant was, so can I throw hardball questions at them and really get my questions answered? Or do I have to be nice and play patty cake with these people and eat their pizza?
That's funny.
And they always loved it when a guy showed up who actually knew what he was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, Perry, it's so funny because I was the U.S. expert on the Mostek on the Zilog Z80, if you remember that microprocessor.
Oh.
So
sort of, okay.
So I was
Wow.
I used to be rolled into companies. I was flown all over the country to fix problems that corporations were having with their designs, and so finally, I ended up going to work for a competitor as a sales guy. And the interesting thing was that the only thing I gravitated towards was the semiconductor companies that did custom semiconductors. So this way, I got to spend my time in engineering, designing in products that I knew would be huge volume, while the sales guys was out there fighting the battle on the commodity stuff in the purchasing agent's office. So it's so funny how we somehow managed to do similar things at similar times. But you're so right about this one element. Something you said is so important here. You said that you were fighting your own nature in that first sales job. And there's the clue. That's it. That's the moment when you say, I don't care. I cannot do this any longer. And I need to plot my way out of this position so that I can stop having headaches every day during the day and hate my life. Right?
Yeah, and there's different versions of this. One version is you're thrown in the lake and you're forced to swim, and you might eventually figure out you're just in the wrong lake. But another version could be, you were in a river and you're swimming, and you used to like this river, but the river has turned, over the last 2 years or 10 years, the river has turned into a river that you don't like anymore.
Yeah.
And then you have to be honest with yourself and say, I'm spending half my life doing stuff that I really don't like, and I am cramming square pegs into round holes, and it is time for a change. And probably there's going to be something painful. It took about 2.5 years for me to make that transition from engineer to successful sales and marketing manager at a technical company, to where all of a sudden, this really is comfortable. But I just have to say, when I finally kind of got it fixed, which was every day I'm showing up and there's leads in my email box and there's leads that came over the fax machine. There's people who want to talk to me, and I'm not having to have a wrestling match in order to get a purchase order because I explained it to them. This is the only product that solves their problem. And here comes a purchase order 3 hours later. And I'm getting commission checks. Like, that was better than any therapy.
Of course. Well,
it was so good.
Yeah. I think it's the life that you designed, and it's the life I designed too. I think the point is that we were both quite deliberate about where we wanted to apply our skills. And I don't know about you, but for me, I have to say it was driven mostly out of boredom. I hated doing stuff I didn't like. I needed to do stuff that was cool and interesting. Yeah. Did you find the same thing about yourself?
Oh, I've always been that way. In fact, the worst version of that was when I was in college doing stupid jobs.
Yeah.
School gets out and I have to get some kind of work, and and I call a temp agency, and the next day I'm screwing bolts onto some assembly in a factory somewhere with all of these people who clearly have been there for 12 years and seem to be able to put up with it. And look, some of us just have brains that need stimulation, and our brains will torture us until we go find something stimulating. I'm sure that probably all of my customers are like that. I mean, of course, it's a different day and age, right? Now the internet provides endless means of useless and destructive stimulation.
Yes.
Right. So now you have to pick your stimulations very carefully, very carefully.
Yep.
In fact, there's almost a monk-like department of my life where I really kind of avoid the stimulation because, it gets to be too much. But yes, very, very much so. It's like I have to be doing something that's interesting. And look, the truth is for most of us, there's really 0.1% of the world, which is where we actually belong.
So true.
Yeah.
So true.
And if you're in the other 99.9% where you don't belong, at some level, it, and you just have to be honest with yourself.
That's so true. I want to address the issue you said a minute ago. The thing you brought up was this distraction, this endless distraction. I think you call it the matrix. And I, as you know, I've just been through your 30-day Reboot program. And for those who don't know what that is, Perry runs a program where every single day there's an email with some directions. And if you want to succeed, you follow the directions every day. And the first day, which was overwhelming. Now, I'm in Japan when I signed up for your program, by the way, in a hotel room. And I told you I listened for an hour to your long, long video, and I loved it. I was spellbound by it. Then I signed up for your 30-day Reboot program. And so the first thing I had to do was unsubscribe from emails. Well, I did not realize that I had been subscribed to over 500 different email lists. I never realized.
It's insidious, isn't it? They just grows like kudzu.
I feel like taking out, the weed spray here, but it must have saved me immediately 2 hours. Immediately, without even thinking about it. And then every single day, each exercise has gotten me to the point where still to this day, even though the program's been over for a couple of weeks, every day I'm downstairs, I'm doing my reading, my meditation, I'm writing in my journal. I mean, it's really been a great program, and I highly recommend it to anybody who's listening.
I have not done anything in at least 5 years that got as much raving testimonials as that. In fact, it was kind of shocking. The first time, so we had a little contest. So tell us, how your life has changed. And the first couple of times when all those entries came in, I started reading them. I was on the edge of tears. I mean, I had for example, I had one lady, she writes in, she goes, I'm not even your ideal customer at all. She goes, I'm a soccer mom. I don't really have a business, although I'm really seriously considering something that I want to go do. But I'm not your typical customer, but I like your emails and I like what you do. And she goes, I did not realize until I went through this program, I was spending 5 hours a day on Facebook.
Oh.
And I was snapping at my kids because they were interrupting my Candy Crush.
Oh, God.
Okay. And now the thing is, though, she's merely admitting it.
Yeah.
I've actually seen numbers that say that the average American spends 5 hours a day on Facebook every day.
Oh, my God.
She merely admitted it. Okay. And people suddenly became self-aware. They're like, I thought I did 8 hours of work today. I did about an hour and 45 minutes of work, and the rest of it was all barnacles. It was some mishmash, social media and low-value tasks, stuff I'm not, gifted for, bad quasi-addictive, time-wasting behavior. And the thing is that chews up your creative engine. It doesn't just waste time.
Well, I can certainly confirm that. And again, a big thank you for the program and the results I got. But let's talk about something you said. You talked about low-value tasks versus high-value tasks. And I was hoping we could transition into a discussion of 80-80, 80-20, and kind of how it affected you and where you took it.
Yes. So back when I had that sales manager job, I heard about 80-20, and I actually printed out a sales report, and I got out a calculator. I'm like, is this really right? Yeah, it was. It was, oh, wow, that's cool. But then, like, that was it. I thought that was it, and it wasn't. And so fast forward a few years. I didn't know that I didn't really understand 80-20 yet. I thought it was just a business rule of thumb that somebody somehow managed to notice. Okay. Mm-hmm. I read Richard Koch's book, The 80-20 Principle, and he makes a offhand remark that 80-20 has a great deal to do with chaos theory and fractals. And then he just goes on talking. And this just stopped me cold in my tracks. And here's why. Back when I had been in college, my wife brought home a book from the library, and she goes, "Here, I think you might think this is interesting." And it was this German book from the 1980s about called the Beauty of Fractals. And for those who don't know, everybody's seen fractals. They're like computer images where there's a spiral growing on a spiral, growing on a spiral, and they're usually really brightly colored, and they look kind of cold and austere. And probably most people just think it's some kind of weird computer art. But I read this book, and it explained that this is like a signature pattern in the universe, and it's a signature of self-similarity and scale. Okay, so let me give you a couple of examples of what I mean by this. So if you look out your window and you see a tree, and you can see the whole shape of the tree has this branching pattern. Well, when you zoom in and zoom in and zoom in on the tree to the smaller branches, to the twigs and the leaves, you keep seeing the same branching pattern over and over again, all the way down to a microscopic level, down to individual cells in a leaf being fed by tiny little veins. That branching pattern just repeats and repeats at every level. Okay?
Wow. Now that's a little bit, must have been something that you just read and said, now that's really interesting, but you probably didn't have an application for it when you read that book, right?
Well, I didn't have an application, but I from that point forward, I couldn't not notice it anymore.
Okay.
Here's what actually happened. Here's what happened. So it's the book did a really good job of explaining it's trees, it's rivers, it's rocks, it's sand on the ocean, it's crystals, it's sand dunes. So like a puddle, you could take a picture of a mud puddle in your front yard after it rains, and a person would not be able to tell whether that's a mud puddle or if it's a lake photographed from an airplane. Okay? Yep. It's the exact, or a little river, right? You could have a little trickle of water on the corner of your driveway, or you could have the river, the Mississippi River, or anything in between, and it's the same pattern exactly. It's just at different scales. Okay. And so it's patterns within patterns within patterns within patterns, and that this is very closely related to things like avalanches, and earthquakes, and cracks in your windshield, like how a crack grows very rapidly when a rock hits your windshield. And so I thought so here's what happens. I walk out, and I walk out to my car the next morning, and it was a cold day, and there were ice crystals growing across the roof of my car, and there's crystal patterns inside the crystal patterns. And I was unlocking my door, and I looked at the roof of my car, and I'm like, oh my word, they're everywhere. This stuff is absolutely everywhere. And I couldn't not notice it anymore. Every time I saw fractals everywhere.
That's amazing.
Now, I didn't really know how to talk to people about it very much because it was a little bit too geeky, but I also knew that fractals just come from taking really simple formulas and repeating them over and over and over and over and over again. That's how you get fractals on a computer screen. It's a really simple little math formula that's just repeats and repeats and repeats, and it goes on forever.
Well, you're familiar, Perry, with the Fibonacci theory as well, because I mean,
yes.
As an investor, I use Fibonacci curves to look at the course of pricing in stocks and charts and make decisions based on the Fibonacci theory.
Yes, and Fibonacci is related to fractals and chaos and scale because a Fibonacci pattern, it works in stocks because macro patterns and micro patterns, macroeconomic changes in a market or microeconomic changes in a tiny little market still obey all the same rules.
Exactly.
Okay? And so the macro and the micro all are in the same set of rules. So Richard makes this little comment, and all of a sudden I'm back to the day by my car with ice crystals, realizing these are everywhere, and like, wait a minute. If that's true, that means there's an 80-20 inside every 80-20, and then there's another one, and there's another one. Oh, my word. And it means that they're across multiple dimensions, so it actually applies to everything. Oh, my word. I freaked out. I jumped up from the coffee shop. I drove home. I had been in business at this point for like a year and a half. I got my web statistics out. I got out my contact, my CRM. I started looking at my email list. I started looking at my customer list. And I'm going, oh, my word. I have an 80-20 fractal pattern in my web traffic. I have an 80-20 fractal pattern in my spreadsheets and my customers, from my biggest customer and my smallest customer. They all, oh, my word. My brain was on fire. And I said, hey, wait a minute. So the way they explain 80-20 is that there's an 80 and there's a 20, and the 80% produces 20%, and the 20% produces 80%, and there are these two groups. I put on my engineer hat and I said, well, actually, that's not what it is. This is a calculus formula. It's like a curve. What would 80-20 look like if you put it on a graph? Well, it would look like an exponential curve that instead of just going up towards the right, what it actually does is it goes asymptotically to the right side of the graph, and it just goes higher and higher and higher. And as you get to the edge, it just zooms up at incredible speed. And I'm like, how would you solve this? And I couldn't figure it out. It actually took me 3 years to figure it out, but I did figure it out. And that is the backbone of my now book, 80-20 Sales and Marketing. There's a website that goes with the book, 8020curve.com, where you use the principle of 80-20 fractal scale to figure out, okay, if I got this buying pattern from, so here's an example. 80-20 tells you that if you own a Starbucks and 1,000 people came in this week and spent $5 on a latte, which is $5,000, right? It's just about pretty much a law of physics that one person will come in and spend $2,700 on an espresso machine. That for every 1,000 lattes you sell for $5, you're going to sell one espresso machine for 500 times more money. And it's true. And Starbucks does sell a $2,700 espresso machine. And 80-20 tells you how many they're going to sell every week. And it also tells you how many $270 espresso machines they're going to sell. And I started to realize you can actually use this to make very small tests of a business idea and predict accurately how they will scale up to very large businesses.
Well, this is, of course, very much along the lines of what fascinates me as well. I have not taken it to the extent that you have, but these are the typical ways that I think about marketing and selling. We all do testing before we ever roll anything out, and we analyze the data. I love the perspective of this. And like I said before, as an investor, I understand the math behind it, but I also understand the reason why the math works. It's nature. It's not because it's some cool formula that somebody thought up. It's mimicking nature and the way nature works. And for those who enjoyed that discussion that we just had about the 80-20 principle, can you just tell us again what that website is? The 80-20 website? It's
8020curve.com. And there's some the best way to understand the site is to read my book 80-20 Sales and Marketing. And what often happens to people when they read 80-20 Sales and Marketing is it's actually the goal that I had when I wrote the book. And the goal that I had when I wrote the book was when people read this book, I wanted them to go, oh my word, this is everywhere. I can't look out a window without seeing 80-20, just like I couldn't look out a window without seeing fractal patterns back when I was 21 years old. I want you to have that epiphany, because if you have that epiphany, then every time you're doing your Google ads and you're sorting by the clicks or the impressions or whatever, or you're doing Facebook ads, or you're doing your CRM system, or you're looking at the opens and the clicks and the money spent, that you will know, okay, all this data, there's a whole bunch of 80-20 patterns in it, and I can optimize a whole bunch of it by only working on 5%. I can ignore the other 5%. I can make predictions about what's going to happen in the future before it's even happened, and I can know that they're going to be right. I can sniff out the invisible levers. So like if you're a consultant, if you understand 80-20 and you're a consultant, you'll never run out of things to go fix for a client. There will always be another lever that you can pull, another rabbit that you can pull out of the hat, and you'll just about never run out. And the good part is that you're working on the levers. You're working on the 20% that makes the 80% of the difference. You're not polishing turds. And that's what's important about it.
Of course. And I think that's part of optimization in any type of a program, any type of a business, and frankly, in our lives. We're always looking to optimize the value of the time we spend, the value of the enjoyment we get from our money and our time. So this is optimization at its finest. And I have not read your book, but I will. I love the idea of the way you described it. I love the epiphany you had. And I would love to apply it the way I understand it from having lived as long as I have, doing similar stuff, but without understanding it from your perspective. So thanks for exposing us all to that. And I mean, listeners, if you don't go out and get that book, you're crazy. It's actually a penny. The book costs a penny. Is that right?
It's a penny plus shipping, which makes it $7 in the U.S. and $14 international. And we, I have a very specific strategy in mind when I do that. So we are taping these like dollar bills to these things when they go out, but I know my metrics, and I know my numbers, and I know how many customers I get out of this, and it's a very calculated move. And what a lot of people, if you read the Amazon reviews, about every 10th person will say the reason you should buy this book is because it comes with all these bonuses, and when you get on Perry's email list, you'll be able to see an 80-20 marketer doing 80-20 marketing. He doesn't just teach it, he does it. And you can learn as much by watching what he does as you can by listening to what he says. And so that's really what I want for people. And you'll make a lot of discoveries that way.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, we've talked about a couple of things today. We've covered a lot of ground, and I really love having this conversation with someone who's so like-minded as you. What I want to do now is I want to talk about the types of stuff that you do for folks, to put it simply. Tell me a little bit more about when you work with clients, what sort of programs do you have, and how could people get more involved in what you do in your world?
Well, the thing that we're most famous for is pay-per-click, and I wrote the world's best-selling book on Google advertising, and also the world's best-selling book on Facebook advertising. And really, my co-authors carry most of the knowledge with those topics now, Keith Krantz and Mike Rhodes. But a lot of people come to us to learn Google AdWords. But there's several things that I consistently find myself working on with them, which is, AdWords or Facebook in and of themselves. I mean, those are fine, but they're also very competitive, and you really have to have your unique selling proposition nailed. We have a better process for unique selling proposition than anybody I've seen in this business. That would be one thing. And the other thing is, Richard Koch, who wrote that original 80/20 book, he and I have become good friends. And Richard, I think, is one of the most underrated authors in business, despite the fact that his 80/20 book sold 1 million copies. He wrote a couple of other books. One of them is called The Star Principle, and the other one is called Simplify. And at some level, both of those concepts undergird everything that I do now. And what we're really trying to do when we work with clients is get them in a position where they have a star business. And what is a star business? Well, Richard grew a consulting firm and sold it. And after he had paid his taxes back in the late 80s or early 90s, he had $4 million in his bank account. In the last 25 years, he's grown his net worth to $400 million as a private equity investor. And if you put the guy on a growth chart, he's almost right up there with Warren Buffett. I mean, he is one of the smartest investors alive. And Star Principle is his criteria for picking winners. And when I read this book, I realized that this actually matched every success story that I'd personally ever had. That Star Principle was fractal. It was scalable. It was the same principle at $400 million or $4 million or $40,000 or even $4,000. And here's what it is. If you want your company to grow and grow fast and produce a good return on investment, or your product, or if you're getting a job and you want opportunities for advancement, you need, whatever it is you're doing, you need to be the number one player in a market that's growing at least 10% a year.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yep, makes a lot of sense.
And if you're not number one, don't even, let's say you're number 16 or you're number 5. Don't bother trying to move to number 4 to number 3 to number 2, which is what almost everybody does. What you do is you carve off a slice of that market that's not being served, and you make yourself number one in that slice. Okay? So if you can't be Coke, don't be Pepsi, be 7-Up. But don't be Sunny Delight, or don't be don't be Shasta.
Well, just to be clear, there are markets for Shasta and Sunny Delight. It's just that what you're saying is that if you want your company to grow in a specific way, generic product companies can grow fabulously, but they're not growing on the principle of excellence. They're generally growing on the principle of delivering the cheapest product for the best price. But nonetheless, I love what you're saying, and it makes a lot of sense. And you know what I do, and I think I subscribe to that as well. So,
oh yeah, and I when Richard explained this better than I'd ever seen it explained, but I had already seen it on Google AdWords. Google, you pick any keyword or any niche in Google AdWords, even if it was just underwater basket weaving, it didn't really matter what it was. The number one player in that market made almost all the profit and gave out almost all the raises and had almost all the promotions, and everybody else, number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, they're all fighting over the scraps. They're all, their kids are skinny, and life is just not that good. I mean, yeah, you can make a living working at Shasta, but it's going to be a hard living, and the morale is low. and nobody really makes that much money, and you're not growing, and like you wake up every day and you have to go fight for everything you get. And for the number one player in a market, it's not like that.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Well, that's a great point, and I'm really glad you shared that. And I think the point that I want to make is that when you expose yourself to Perry's list and to Perry's work, this is the kind of thinking you get, and I get this kind of thinking every day in my inbox. Perry, at this point, I have a question for you, and it's a question I like to ask because it typically gives me some insight into who I'm talking to. Here's the question. Who in all of space and time would you like to have 1 hour to enjoy a walk in the park, a quick lunch, or an intense conversation with?
I would pick the person who's the most loved, most hated, most argued about, most adored, most discussed. It'd be Jesus.
Ah, there you go.
You talk about stepping into the world and splitting time in half, BC and AD. Mm-hmm. And, I've been a Christian all my life, but I don't have any doubt if I had lunch with Jesus for an hour, my mind would be blown. And there would be this giant list of assumptions that I had and sacred cows that got shredded. I would love to do that.
Well, Jesus is very popular on this show. He's mentioned a lot when I asked that question. So,
really?
You're in good company. And, I'm sorry?
I guess what really, is at the top of my mind when I say that is just how controversial he was.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a polarizing guy. And I think a lot of the popular depictions and teaching about Jesus are kind of a milquetoast, like really nice guy that looks like a French painter. Mm. And I just know he's a wild man. He's a crazy, man, if you were one of Jesus' disciples every day, you would probably feel like you're careening around a turn on some steep cliff, and we don't know if the tires are going to stick to the road or if the thing's just like going to go over a cliff like a burning bus. I mean, I really think Jesus has been like watered down into this namby-pamby person. Most people, by the way, have never read the Gospels. They've never actually read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All the information they have is secondhand. Well, when your information about anybody or anything is secondhand, you're getting a very diluted version of it. And while we're on this topic, I think most Christian men are secretly pissed.
Why?
Because they think they're supposed to sit there on a church pew and be mediocre for the rest of their life, be obedient and like conform. And I don't think that's the point at all. I think life is supposed to be a wild, crazy adventure. And life isn't about just obeying all the rules. Hello. Pay attention. Do you see how many rules the guy broke? Yesterday I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he told me something I had never quite realized. He said when Uber was first starting, one of the dictums that Travis told everybody was, let's see how many laws we can break today.
Oh boy, has he held to that, huh?
Well, and as a Christian, I just have to ask, how many Christians would run screaming from the room at the prospect of doing such a thing when you realize after the guy was successful, you realize he really broke up one of the most corrupt industries that has ever existed, which is the taxi business.
Yes, that's true. He did.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, and they were in bed with all the city governments, and you could pretty much gauge the corruption level of a city by whether Uber could make it work, right? Like how long did it take before Uber could finally operate in Louisiana? Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Or in New Orleans, for example, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, you're definitely on track, but I just want to make the point that I think that if you believe that being good is the same as being successful, then you got some wires twisted. And I think most people realize that. The other thing I'm here to tell you is that where none of us are really being very good. I think everybody is out there bending the rules. And I think in some ways, it's not that you should break the law. I think it's by bending the rules, you get to test your limits and discover where there is a place and a time to go either have some fun or make some money. So I love that idea. And I think Jesus would be a blast to hang out with. Even though I'm Jewish, I'd still like to hang out with another Jewish guy.
I have no doubt. I have no doubt. And I think... I don't know. I think he'd get along with the Jewish guys better than a lot of Christians.
I don't know. Maybe so. I'd love the chance. I've never said this on the show, but, my person is Nikola Tesla because so he's my guy because I saw his ability to see the future in a way that nobody else ever did. And in fact, he was so controversial that Edison tried to destroy him. I mean, how smart do you have to be for Thomas Edison to have to destroy you? I mean, and it goes beyond that. His stuff is to this day still being discovered. They are unearthing his research and trying to replicate it so that we could transmit energy through the air. This is who this guy was. That's why he's my favorite.
That is awesome. Yeah. Well, my now 13-year-old discovered Tesla about 2 years ago. He's like, Dad. So yeah, I'm with you. Cool. I would love to have lunch with Tesla.
Yeah, cool.
He died not having received the recognition that he really deserved. That's for sure.
That is so true. Okay, so here's my grand finale question, and this is the change the world question, and it's really very straightforward. What is it that you are doing or would like to do that truly has the potential to literally change the world?
I have two mega bucket list items. One is to heal the rift between science and religion, and the other one is to start a second Renaissance.
Okay.
And I'm hard at work on both of those. The clearest example of what I'm trying to do is in my book Evolution 2.0, which is on Amazon, which is a science book. It's not a business book. I think that the war between science and religion is a ridiculous con, and it is perpetrated by people on both sides. It's a big grudge match. It didn't even exist 150 years ago. It was actually invented. So let me just give you an example of this. So have you ever heard the story of Christopher Columbus going to the Queen of Spain saying, I want to sail to, sail across the ocean. And she says, but you'll fall off the edge of the earth. Have you ever heard that story?
Yes, I have.
Did you know that's a complete fabrication?
Well, that was taught to me in school. How could that be a lie?
That was made up.
Wow.
In 1871 by a guy named John Draper, who wanted to make Catholics look like idiots.
Oh my God.
So he wrote this book and he convinced a whole bunch of people that people in Christopher Columbus's time thought that the earth was flat. They didn't. They all knew the earth was round. The only argument was how big it was.
Right.
And Columbus thought it was smaller, and he thought India was the next stop. And well, he wasn't really quite right about that, but he hit pay dirt anyway.
Sure.
But this gives you an idea, and so as just one example that's been repeated a million times on a whole bunch of different scales. And I think if we could heal this one up, the world would transform in some really tantalizing ways.
Well, I agree. And I think that's an excellent point to end the show because we have covered so much ground today, Perry. I've so enjoyed speaking with you. For listeners, if you'd like to get involved in Perry's world, join me, please, because you would be welcome. And go to perrymarshall.com and just dive in. There's so much there. There's so many great resources. And just start learning and expand your mind because Perry's someone who has a lot to teach. Perry, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed our conversation. Let's talk again soon.
Mitch, thank you. It was a total pleasure to be here today.
You've been listening to Your First 1,000 Clients with your host, Mitch Russo. Go to www.yourfirst1000clients.com for a free guide on how to get 1,000 of your own clients. And if you like this episode, please go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review.